There is a specific moment that happens inside narcissistic relationships that no one ever warns you about. Not in the books, not in the therapy sessions, not in the late-night conversations with the friends who watched you fall apart and tried their best to hold you together. It is not the moment they first showed you who they really were. It is not the moment you finally said enough. It is not even the moment you understood, with devastating clarity, that everything you thought you had was constructed out of illusions and your own desperate need to believe in them. The moment I am talking about comes later, much later. It comes in the strange, airless, almost surreal space that opens up when both of you go completely silent at the same time. No messages, no block then unblock social media checks, no calls from numbers you do not recognize, no texts disguised as checking in, no reaching through mutual friends, nothing. Just silence from both directions at once. And inside that silence, something begins to happen to you that you were never prepared for. Something the narcissist never wanted you to be able to experience. Because the shock that follows mutual silence is not the shock of loss. It is the shock of clarity. And clarity, for someone who has been living inside a fog engineered by another person, feels more disorienting than the fog ever did. Before we go any deeper into what this silence does to both of you, I want to stop and speak directly to you for a moment. If you have spent any portion of your life feeling confused by someone who claimed to love you, if you have apologized for things you did not do, if you have shrunk yourself to fit inside the space someone else decided you were allowed to occupy, if you have questioned your memory, your feelings, your worth, your reality, this space exists for you. Subscribe to this channel right now and stay close, because every single piece of content here is built around one purpose: helping you understand what happened to you with enough clarity that it can never be used against you again. Understanding is not optional when you are healing from narcissistic abuse. It is the foundation, and you deserve to stand on solid ground. Now let us talk about what is actually happening when both of you go silent. Because most people get this completely wrong. The common assumption is that no contact is a tool the survivor uses, and the narcissist resists. The survivor disappears, the narcissist pursues, and the dynamic continues in a different costume. That story is real, and it is common. But there is another scenario that is far more psychologically charged, far more destabilizing for both people involved, and far less discussed. It is the scenario where the narcissist also stops reaching out, where, for whatever reason, pride, a new source of attention, wounded ego, a calculated strategy of waiting you out, or simply the distraction of another life, they also go quiet. And suddenly there is no chaser and no runner. There is no pursuer and no withholder. There is only space, open, total, consuming space. And space is the one environment a narcissistic bond was never built to survive. To understand why this silence becomes something close to a psychological earthquake, you have to understand what the relationship was actually made of beneath everything you felt and everything they performed. It was not built on love, even though it felt like the most intense love of your life at its peak. It was built on circulation, a constant self-sustaining loop of emotional energy moving between the two of you in the form of attention, reaction, conflict, hope, jealousy, validation, longing, fear, and relief. Every interaction fed the system. Every argument was a form of contact. Every silence within the relationship was merely a setup for the next explosion of contact. The relationship was a closed circuit, and it required continuous current to stay alive. When both of you stop reaching out simultaneously, the current dies. And when the current dies, both of you are left alone in the dark with very different things waiting for you there. For the narcissist, what waits in that darkness is the thing they have spent their entire emotional life running from. People make the mistake of believing that narcissists are unbothered by absence because they appear so cold, so self-contained, so quick to replace one person with another. What is actually happening beneath that surfaces something far more fragile and far more volatile. A narcissist does not carry a stable inner identity the way emotionally healthy people do. Their sense of self is not something they possess. It is something they borrow continuously from the reactions of the people around them. Your love was a mirror. Your anger was a mirror. Your hope was a mirror. Your pain was a mirror. Even your resentment reflected back to them a version of themselves they could use. When you stop reaching out, one mirror goes dark. When they also stop reaching out, the entire system of reflection that your relationship built together collapses at once. And what a narcissist sees when every mirror goes dark is not themselves. It is the absence of themselves, a void where an identity should be. This is why prolonged mutual silence does something to a narcissist that ordinary rejection never could. Ordinary rejection still gives them a role to play. The wronged party, the cold one, the one who moved on first. Mutual silence gives them nothing to perform for, no one to position themselves against, no audience, no stage. There is only the unbearable interior noise of a self that was never fully formed sitting in a room with no exits. Their mind begins to do things in that silence, things they would never admit to. They replay the relationship, distorting memories in whatever direction serves their need in that moment. Sometimes painting you as the villain so they can feel righteous. Sometimes briefly idealizing you again, because the pain of complete disconnection forces them backward toward the one place they felt most real, which was in your orbit. They begin to wonder obsessively what you are doing, not because they love you, but because not knowing your current state robs them of the certainty that they still exist inside you. And for a person whose psychological survival depends on occupying space in other people's minds, that uncertainty is not uncomfortable. It is destabilizing in a way that sits closer to terror. The narcissist does not miss you the way a person who genuinely loved you would miss you. They miss the function you performed. They miss the predictable supply of your emotional presence. They miss the quiet power of knowing that somewhere in the world, someone was still being affected by them. When both of you go silent, that knowing disappears, and in its place grows a question they cannot answer and cannot tolerate. Have you already forgotten them? Have they already become irrelevant? That question is the one thing their entire personality structure was constructed to prevent. Now, let us talk about what is happening on your side of the silence, because it is nothing less than the most important internal event of your recovery. In the earliest days of mutual silence, you will not feel free. Your body will not register this as relief. Your nervous system, which was chemically and emotionally shaped by the rhythms of that relationship, will register it as danger. The cycles you lived through, the tension that built, the explosion that followed, the reconciliation that temporarily soothed, and the slow creeping return of tension again. Those cycles became your body's version of normal. Your brain learned to anticipate them. When they stop without warning, your physiology responds with something that is almost indistinguishable from withdrawal, restlessness without cause, grief without a clear object, an aching hollowness that wakes you up at 3 a.m. and sits on your chest without explaining itself. You may reach for your phone more times in a single hour than you can count, not because you want to contact them, or not only because of that, but because your nervous system is searching for the next signal in a pattern that has been suddenly interrupted. This is not weakness. This is not evidence that you still love them in the way you fear you do. This is your body coming off one of the most potent interpersonal chemicals that exists, the trauma bond. And what you are feeling is the accurate and temporary pain of that detox. If this is speaking to something you have been living with in silence yourself, I want you to do something right now. Subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone you know who is walking through the same fire. Because the isolation of recovering from narcissistic abuse is one of its cruelest features. The people who love you want to help, but often cannot find the words. The people who have been through it understand but may not be in your life. This community exists to close that gap. Stay close to it. You were not meant to make sense of this alone. Then comes the second wave of the silence, and this one runs deeper than withdrawal. This is grief, real, layered, complicated grief. And the reason it is so disorienting is that you are not grieving only the person you lost. You are grieving the version of yourself that believed in them. You are grieving the specific chapter of your life that you gave to something that could not return what you invested. You are grieving the person they pretended to be in the beginning, the one who seemed to see you more completely than anyone ever had, who mirrored your values and your dreams and your humor back to you with astonishing precision, who made you feel for a brief and brilliant window of time like you had finally been found. That person was never real. But your response to them was, your love was real, your hope was real, your investment was real, and you were allowed to grieve what your real feelings were poured into, even if the vessel was empty all along. You were also grieving something more private, and perhaps more painful than any of it. You were grieving the parts of yourself that went quiet during the relationship, the instincts you overrode because they contradicted what you needed to believe, the friendships that slowly thinned because the relationship consumed every spare hour of your attention, the opinions you stopped voicing because voicing them cost too much, the version of you that existed before. You learned to brace, to monitor, to manage, to shrink, to predict and prevent and absorb. That version of you did not disappear, but they went somewhere deep and quiet and waited. And in the mutual silence, with every distraction stripped away, with no messages to decode, no moods to navigate, no emotional weather to prepare for, they begin to surface, slowly, tentatively, like something stepping out of shadow and back into light, blinking, uncertain, but unmistakably alive. Here is what happens next, and I want you to hold on to this because it is one of the truths that will carry you through the hardest days of this silence. As the weeks pass and the silence holds, an invisible shift takes place inside the power structure of what was between you. The narcissist expected contact to resume. It is not arrogance, though arrogance plays its part. It is the architecture of their psychology, which was built on the deep and unexamined certainty that the bonds they create with people are unbreakable, not because of love, but because of the weight of shared trauma, unfinished arguments, emotional debts that never get settled, and the human need for closure that they consistently withheld. They assumed that loneliness would eventually drive you back, or guilt, or the terrible gravity of questions that have no answers. They assumed you could not sustain the silence because they could not imagine a version of you that had grown large enough to survive it. And when the silence continues, when it holds its shape day after day, something inside them begins to fracture in a way they cannot outwardly acknowledge or internally process. The certainty that they still matter to you begins to erode, and what lives beneath that certainty is the very thing their entire personality was constructed to protect them from confronting, the possibility that they were never as essential as they needed to believe. You, meanwhile, are becoming something new in the silence. You are learning that your mind can be quiet, that your thoughts can return to you, that the constant background frequency of anxiety that you carried for so long was not your nature, but their influence. You are learning that peace does not feel like numbness, even though you were conditioned to confuse the two. You are learning that you can sit with yourself for an evening and feel not the absence of stimulation, but the presence of your own life returning to you degree by degree. Your body begins to soften in places you forgot were held tight. Your sleep, slowly and irregularly, begins to return to something resembling rest. Your appetite for your own interests, your own friendships, your own quiet pleasures begins to reassert itself without apology. And one day, there is no predicting when this day will come, only that it will. You will notice that you have gone an entire hour without thinking of them, then a morning, then a day, not because you forced it, not because you distracted yourself into it, But because your mind, given the room to heal, is naturally orienting itself back toward your own life, toward your future, toward the people and purposes that were always there, waiting patiently behind the static the relationship generated, the narcissist grows smaller in your consciousness, not through hatred, not through effort, but through the most devastating thing you could ever do to someone who needed to be the center of your world. Simple, organic, total indifference, real indifference, the kind that is not performed, not strategic, not a weapon, the kind that arrives quietly one morning when you realize they have simply stopped taking up the space they once did. This is the thing a narcissist cannot survive. They can navigate your love. They can weaponize your anger. They can outlast your sadness. But they have no defense against becoming genuinely irrelevant in the inner life of someone they once controlled, because their power was never truly theirs. It was always yours, on loan, and you were simply taking it back. This is what the shock of mutual silence eventually becomes, on the other side of the withdrawal and the grief and the long, quiet reckoning with yourself. It becomes the beginning of the only version of your life that belongs entirely to you. You were told in 100 subtle ways during that relationship that you were too much and not enough simultaneously, too sensitive, too perceptive, too emotional, too demanding, too attached, too present, too aware. What they were actually telling you, in the only language available to someone who feared what you carried, was that you were too real for them to manage. Your realness threatened their construction. Your depth exposed the shallowness of what they offered in return. They did not attempt to diminish you because you were small. They attempted to diminish you because you were not, and they needed you not to know that. The silence between you and the narcissist is not the ending of your story. It only feels that way in the beginning, when the nervous system is still listening for sounds that are no longer coming. What it actually is, what it is becoming with every day that passes, is the opening of the only chapter you have ever written entirely in your own voice. Every day you do not reach out, you are writing it. Every morning you wake and choose your own healing over the familiar ache of their absence. You are writing it. Every moment you spend returning to yourself rather than waiting for them to return to you, you are writing it. And the story you are writing in this silence is one they never wanted you to believe you were capable of. The story of someone who survived being made invisible and came back into full and undeniable view. If these words are landing somewhere true in you, please subscribe to this channel, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and stay close to this community. Because you are not just healing, you are waking up. And the world on the other side of this silence is waiting for the version of you that was always there. Before the confusion, before the self-doubt, before someone convinced you that their version of you was the real one. That version is returning now. Quietly, stubbornly, completely. Welcome back. You were worth every moment of the wait.